In exercise 8, we're going to be looking at another technique we can use to reduce the amount of work that we do when we're doing our rotoscoping. Because coming back to my golden threads again, number one, as we've seen many times before, is do as little work as possible. Now, one of the best ways of doing as little work as possible is to avoid doing any sort of manual rotoscoping at all, and actually using any other sort of method to try and generate up the same results as you would do via normal roto techniques. And one of those that we have available to us is keying. As we get into this section, I'm going to be using a few sort of common terms, and I just want to make sure that we all understand them in the same sort of way, because there is a bit of ambiguity going around with some of these things and the way that people use them in their everyday life. But when I talk about a mat, I'm talking about something that we've generated up through some sort of keying technique or some other sort of procedural technique. When I'm talking about a mask, I'm talking about something that we've drawn ourselves. And these don't have to be animated necessarily. The act of drawing an alpha channel creates a mask. The act of generating an alpha channel in another way, for example using a keyer, it generates up a mat. So when I'm talking about garbage mats and garbage masks, these do become a little bit interchangeable. I'll be using the word garbage mat quite a lot, even though I am actually drawing the shape. There's no sort of real overarching reason why I do that, but that's just something to look out for. If I say a garbage mat, even if it's something we've drawn, I am talking about a garbage mask. They're the same sort of thing. Cool, let's take a look at the keyer then and see how we access that. I have my footage loaded in already, and let's create a new session. And we will call this keing 001. And if we take a look at the nodes here, we've really only touched on the roto node to begin with so far. I'm going to turn on the keyer node here as well. And this is going to spring up into our node list and give us a whole load of new tools to work with. So let's just play our footage through and have a look what we've got to deal with. So our task here is to roto the girl again. And this is quite a complex bit of footage to be working with. Let's just do a quick analysis of it. We've got a moving camera, a handheld shot, looks like, yep, definitely handheld shot. We have got a moving actor as well in there. And to complicate things, let's zoom in a little bit. We've got a lovely amount of hair coming in here as well, which is going to be an absolute pain to roto out. So to try and avoid that pain, we're going to do something with the keyer here. For those of you who are comfortable with working with keyers in other applications, generally your compositing app, a lot of this is going to seem fairly straightforward. There are some strange gotchas that you'll have to look at, and we're going to work our way through those as we go. If you haven't used keyers before, this is also going to be quite a fun little introduction to that there as well. Okay, so let's hit F just to bring us back out. And this gives us another good excuse to get very comfortable with these different views that we've been working with. So generally so far we've been working with looking at the composite view. We've also switched to the foreground view a few times. So the keyboard shortcuts for moving between these different views is just the numbers at the top on the keyboard. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now these will change, so that's why I haven't given you a sort of hard and fast rule for which numbers do what, because in our roto node we only have 5 outputs that we can look at, or 5 views we can look at, whereas in the keyer we have 7. So they will just move you through in order. But it's really in the keyer here that we'll be switching through these views very, very rapidly. So let's look at our primary mat here, and our first thing is the extract on. We have a choice of what channel it is we want to be looking at here. And we've got a couple of options for blue screen and green screen. We can also look at luminance, hue and saturation, average, all the red, green and blue channels, an alpha channel if it's already got one, and the cyan, magenta or yellow channel. So what is it we're really looking for? So what we're looking for is to try to do as little work on the roto as possible. Now we've got a great amount of contrast between the arm up here in the white sky here. So the white sky, or it's not completely white, but the very, very bright sky here gives us a great opportunity for trying to sort of pull a luma key on this. So try and use the luminance values to actually avoid having to roto out most of this stuff. So let's have a look at the luma here, and our screen goes all a little bit weird. And that's because we're still on composite. Let's go to primary matte instead, and this gives us a more familiar black and white alpha channel, and we'll use this as the starting point. So we have our position, and this is really, you know, where it's going to start the key. So it's going all the way from 0, which is black, up to 100, which is white. So as we move through here, we'll actually find a little sweet spot where what we want is the bit that we want to keep in is white, which is going to be the arms here and the hair here, and the bit that we want to take out is going to be black, and that's going to be pretty much the rest of the sky. So we will find a little sweet spot here where we've got a good amount of contrast going on there. So the range here determines the values around this position of what becomes opaque or transparent. And as we decrease this range to something very, very small, we actually get a very harder key. So only the stuff that really is exceedingly close to being 41% grey is kept in. Everything else is keyed out. So as we take this up, we're going to have more things included, but we're also going to start to take in more of the stuff that we don't really want. And this is this gives us a very smooth range up here. So I'm going to adjust this down so I can still get a bit of black going on there. Now the next two, we've got a black clip and white clip, and this is a very, very hard clip. So for those of you who have been used to working on keys with sort of built-in levels commands, this is a bit of a shock, because this isn't going to give you that same kind of increase of the overall contrast. So if I take this up to 15, for example, it's going to say that everything that is 15% grey or lower is now absolute black. All the other levels are exactly the same as they were. It's only going to be clipping that black off there. And this gives us a very different result than if we had for example, a built-in levels command there, which would increase the contrast throughout. This is just a black clip to take out some of the nasties. We have a shrink and grow, which does what it says on the tin. It lets us either grow out the edges or shrink them back in using a min-max command. And we can also blur the edges up. And let's zoom in a second, because I want to show you this. Because as a complement to the blur, we also have the wrap. Now you can see what the blur is doing. The blur is blurring everything outwards and inwards at the same time. What the wrap is doing is it's just blurring inwards. So it's really, really useful for light wrap, where you get the background now just sort of bleeding in just a little bit over the arms there. That will create a much better sense that our keyed object is actually sitting on the background. But I'm going to leave that set to 0. I tend to actually leave that for the compositing stage actually, but it can be used in a slightly different way just to get you out of a situation you're in. All right, so let's take a look at that and see how it's looking as our composite. So currently this is looking quite weird because we've got our composite set up, but our input background is set to none. So if we import something else, import anything else, let's think the plane of motion. There we go. We'll go with, was it New York exterior we used? And now we'll set that up as our background, and then move anywhere else to actually see that in situ. Probably not the greatest background to have because it is slightly confusing, but we can, if you're a bit creative about it, we can see that we do have our nice lines going on for the arms, so we don't have to work too hard with them. There are of course certain points here which aren't, let's look at this back in our primary matte again. There are certain points here where things aren't really working out for us. We've got grey where we should have white, and that's a lot of this stuff here as well. So luckily we can also work with a secondary matte as well. So if I come and view our secondary matte is basically, it's the same thing again, so it just lets us pick something else. So for this time, let's have a look at the blue, and that gives us quite a nice separation as well. And let's just have a little look there. That's looking interesting anyway. But we do need to invert it because obviously we want the white stuff to stay in. And we can now come up to our view and go to combined matte here, and we can choose how we sort of combine these together. So let's just flick between our primary matte and find that bit where the grey was, which is pretty much there, and go to our combined matte here, and that's filled in all of that stuff. So let's see how the composite's looking now. It's looking a lot different. We've got a bit of the hair coming in, and the hair's looking quite nice. We've got the arms coming in, arms looking nice as well. We need to fill in a little bit here, which has been missed out by both of the keys, but generally that's pretty good. We're missing out a bit of that there as well. I'm not sure if we can do anything about that. Let's have a look. Not really, because I think if we look at our original, this is actually the same as the sky, so it's going to be pretty difficult to work our way through. The colour suppression down here, let's turn this on here. This the colour suppression here works only with the blue screen and the green screen stuff here, so we don't have that same opportunity to play around with that right at this very moment. And the D artifact here, we can come in and it will attempt to take out some of the noise from our clip before we even start to process these things up, because depending on your source material, you actually might not have a great place to start keying anyway. So we've got it this far. This is great. We've got a good separation going on for the for most of the hair, and for the face, and for the arms. We need to fill in the t-shirt and actually generally just take out the rest of the background. So how do we work with this into our workflow into the roto? Well, let's come along and come to our roto here. And our roto at the moment is set to output. So it's not showing any of the results coming through from the keyer. But if we set this to composite, all of a sudden this is now showing us our little background and showing the work that's coming through on the keyer. And it's at this point here, one come to my prefs, come to the composite section in there, and we can change this to be basically whatever we need it to be. And that is a fairly obnoxious colour, which is what it's meant to be, but it's actually a little bit too obnoxious for me there. I'm going to take a similar but differently obnoxious yellow for this as well. Any particular reason for that yellow? No, not really. One of the things that that you could do is now create a garbage mask to take out most of this stuff that we're not going to be interested in. And let's just do that. I'm going to take a very, very rough X-spline here, take it out, and play this through just to make sure that I'm not cutting off anywhere. No, that looks okay to me. And now the thing to do is to come in and change the blend mode over here. So instead of being add or subtract, we now have intersect. So that only the places where we're intersecting with the sort of garbage mask and the keyer do we start to see any of those results. So from here on out, that's a case of just coming in and using the tools we've worked on before to either remove or add to our mask, using the same techniques as we've done previously of breaking things up into smaller sections. Setting this to minus here for that one, and tracking it all through. And while I'm here, actually, let's have a little look about layer order, because this is probably a good time as any to look at that. Just going to create a super quick X-spline again. Set that to corner, set that to corner. Cool, so at the moment this is my t-shirt and this is the arm gap, which is the arm right hand side gap. So here at the moment I've got the t-shirt on top set to add and the arm gap set underneath it, set to subtract, which is doing a good job. But it's but because my t-shirt's on top, it's adding in this section here which I've just subtracted. So by taking the t-shirt down there, I can now subtract that little area off here. So here what I probably do is plug all the gaps that I need to, for example in parts of the hair, this little bit here, plug all those in with add shapes, and then do the minus shapes afterwards, just to save a bit of time on that, so that we're not duplicating any effort. And it does mean that we can get these add shapes a little bit looser because we know we're going to be subtracting them afterwards anyway. Because look here, for example, we know we're going to have to add something over this arm, and we know we're going to have to subtract some of this background. So what's the point in actually spending a whole load of time carefully mapping this out here when we know we're going to have to carefully map it out again when we come in and do the subtraction? Just doesn't make sense. What does make a lot more sense is to do this very loose, get it done quickly, and then come in and do the fine detail work when we do the subtraction stuff here, which is what we're going to have to do at any rate. Well, that's it for the first part of the keying. Before we leave, I want to show us, I want to go through one of the other little things that I talked a little bit about in the last exercise, which was in the human spin. Create a new session on that and add the keyer on this here, and I will call this keing 002. Cool. This is this actually is quite a tricky example, and it's something that you wouldn't think would be that complicated, because you can see that there's quite a big difference going on between the reds here and the skins here. But actually, we can find ourselves in a little bit of trouble fairly quickly. So let's come to our primary matte in here and look at the luminance. And you see that we can get some sort of a contrast going on in the hair here, but not enough from the background. So even if we try to kind of lighten this up with expanding out the range, we can't use the clips because the clip doesn't really help us in this context. All it does is sort of mess up the hair quite significantly there. So we have to sort of think about this in a different way. Let's invert this for a start. A slightly different view of things as well. Let's come to our secondary matte and enable that as well. Come to the secondary matte. And then instead of blue, let's have a look at the... What did we look at last time? Let's look at the foreground again here and just go through these ones. So the red is going to definitely be giving us the best contrast on that. So let's go to here. Come to our red. Invert that to begin with. And this is getting us a little bit closer as well, but again not close enough. So let's come to our combined matte here, and everything sort of seems to be sort of blowing out quite a bit. And that's because our blend mode here is set to screen. So our matte now is always going to be lighter than either matte number 1 or matte number 2, so our primary or a secondary matte. But if we set this to some of the other ones, we can see that we are getting significantly different results. So darken and lighten are only giving us either the darkest or the lightest pixels going in here, and multiply is always going to be giving us a slightly darker view than we had before. So if we're looking at the combined matte now, we might be able to do something what I don't want to do is I don't want to take out too much of that nice fine edge detail here. Let's have a little play of that. As long as the edges are fine, all of this stuff in the middle we can fill in fairly simply. But it's this edge detail here that can be a bit of a bugger. Now if this stuff isn't working, again I'm going to go back to my golden rule and say if it's not working, trash it. So let's come to our, instead of doing Luma on our primary matte, let's take that to red as well. And see what we can figure out with that. Maybe even one of the other ones. Hue's not particularly useful in this scenario either. You'll also find that on more compressed footage as well, where a lot of the colour information has been compressed quite harshly, that both hue and saturation are going to be no-goes. Admittedly, this was compressed down to a JPEG sequence, but this was originally shot on red, so we shouldn't be seeing the same sort of compression artifacts on the colour as we would do on a lot of other acquisition formats, which really do crush the colours down quite significantly. And some shots, you know, you're going to just have to say that you're not going to be able to get them done using this key set. So you could find yourself better off using a compositing app to actually pull a garbage Mac for you before you start bringing that in to work on the roto. So doing your roto in Silhouette, but actually doing the key for the procedural work in your compositing app. I hope that's given you a few good ideas about how to use the keyer, and also made you aware of some of the limitations that the built-in keyer actually has. So we looked at the different types of mats and how we combine those together, and then the workflow moving forward in the roto section about creating the garbage mats, and then if we need to add additional patches in for your roto in specific places, doing the add first and then subtracting again where you need to. In exercise 9 we're going to be following up on something we've looked at previously, but showing it in a little bit more detail, and that is how we work with motion blur.